It's a great pleasure and a privilege today to be here with you, but also to have Bill Johnson with us. And Bill's a friend of ours, and we're going to have a conversation around the theme of freedom. And Kim and I had the privilege of spending 3 months in Redding, California at Bethel Church back in 2009, where, to be honest, we were welcomed with open arms, and it was just an extraordinary experience. And Bill, you opened up basically a floodgates of blessing for us, and we're so grateful for that. And at the end of our 3 months, when we were ready to come back to the UK, Kim and I were talking and saying, well, how do we sum this up? What did we learn? We'd learned so much, we'd experienced so much, and we said there was one word that encapsulated it all, and that was the word freedom. That we'd experienced an environment of freedom, a culture of freedom, a theology of freedom that certainly liberated us personally in huge ways, but also actually taught us something as we came back to the UK and to Europe with a determination, and also we felt a mandate from heaven to create an environment of freedom such as we had experienced, so that other people could learn how to live in freedom as God intended. So we want to chat with you about how you and Bethel have created that environment of freedom, the core beliefs that underpin it and are expressed through it, and the generosity that flows through it. So Kim, you had some ideas just to feed Bill with questions.
One of the things I realised in the 3 months was this wasn't just freedom from, it was freedom to be. And I just wondered if you could unpack that a bit for us, Bill.
Yeah, well, it's actually that thinking, specific thinking, has been on my mind this last week in unusual ways. Actually, I've just been pondering the nature of freedom and not realizing we would be discussing that today. But it's not freedom if I'm just freed from something. I must be freed unto something. And if you take a prisoner and you get him out of prison and you release him and he's homeless and doesn't have a job and still struggling with addictions or whatever, then he's not really free. He's not free until he's released into something, until he's restored back into society. And as believers, we are set free from sin. We're set free from addictions, all those things. But beyond that, we are set into the lifestyle of Christ, into his character, into his nature, into his mandate. And real freedom is seen when you have it'd be Isaiah 61, the most despised and rejected of society become the rebuilders of society. They're freed from something and they're freed unto something. And that's the great privilege for every believer. Every believer has a place of unusual significance. And so as ministers of the gospel, we've got to, beyond the conversion, into the lifestyle that demonstrates they are converted. And so you said it right. They're set free to be something. And that really is the mandate that we have, and probably is the nature of discipleship, probably is the essence of what it means to make disciples.
And Galatians 5 verse 1 says, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. That used to confuse me, that verse, until I thought it's saying the same thing, but it's not. It's actually saying you are freed for a purpose of freedom. And then it goes on to say, don't allow yourselves to be made slaves again, effectively. And, I'm amazed when I read the book of Exodus how willing the Israelites were to go back to Egypt. Somehow slavery had an attraction for them, and that's true for Christians as well, isn't it? But again, you've actually, when we came to Bethel, we experienced something there that says actually this is your core purpose, to live in freedom, and this is the power with which to do it. And as I said, those core beliefs that you teach there, we'd love you just to unpack those a little bit for us and for the people listening.
Yeah. In looking back over the last 40 years of ministry in Weaverville, which is an hour from here, daughter church of Bethel, and then my 25 years here, just in reviewing, I was trying to identify what the core values were that just drove us, is probably not the best word, but launched us. And it was, number one, God is good. Number two, nothing is impossible. Number three, everything was accomplished at the cross. Everything we'll ever need throughout eternity was purchased at Calvary. And then number four, every person is significant. And but I wasn't content to identify that. Helped me, but true beliefs create behaviors. And I wanted to have measurable behaviors to see in what degree we truly embrace that particular truth. So because God is good, I have to dream big. I have to be known. My dreaming will always be consistent with my understanding of his goodness, because his goodness empowers me. It frees me from, but it frees me into the discovery of who he is, his nature. And that is best seen oftentimes in the life of a believer through their dreams. Not their dreams at night. It may include that, but that's not the point. It's that we dream big concerning what God would do in the earth. I was reading out of Proverbs 24 earlier this week, and it basically said this, that wisdom enables you to see the outcome of a matter. And for that reason, wisdom is the source of hope. Okay. And so when you see God's goodness, you have this perception of the outcome of a matter. You know, I don't know what's going on. I don't know. I'm certainly not in charge, but I know one who is, and I know the outcome is going to be good. And because of that, hope is the product, if you will. It's what really sustains me in these seasons. So the goodness of God is measurable by my responsibility, in a sense, to dream big. The second one is nothing is impossible with God. And all these are things every believer would just nod yes to, because we've heard them all of our lives. The breakdown comes in the behavior. And so because if I truly believe that nothing is impossible with God, I will take more risk. I will take greater risk so that the one who knows no restriction, no impossibility, will be given an opportunity to invade something and display the wonder of his name. I have that responsibility. I don't consider these just luxury items as well as they may be. They're responsibilities. And so because nothing is impossible with God, I have to take risk. I have to give him the occasion, the opportunity to display his wonder. And the third one is everything was purchased at Calvary. And because if you think about it, all in heaven, 100 billion years from now, we will be thriving in the wonder, the beauty of his presence. But all of that was purchased way back at the cross when he died in my place. He took my sins. So because everything was purchased then, and I don't understand always what's happening in my life, I owe him my trust. My understanding of him having settled everything at Calvary is measured by me trusting him big time. The overall thing for my life is I just trust him. I may not know what's going on with this pandemic. I may not know what's going on in the political arena, all these different things. But the bottom line is I am anchored because he settled everything ahead of time, knowing everything that would be needed throughout all eternity. It's already been dealt with. I have reason to trust him big time. And I owe him that kind of trust. And then the last one is every person is significant. And it's important perhaps for us to say, I am significant. It's not just you all, it's just every one of us have a place of unusual significance. Every one of us actually has the opportunity to carry an aspect of God's nature. We were made in his image. So we carry an aspect of God's nature that no one else will fully represent because he is that big and we are that unique. And so every person is really needed to really demonstrate the nature of Christ in the earth. So the point is that because I am significant, it has to be measured not in my greatness, but in my willingness to serve. And because of my significance, no position is too low. And it says in John 13, it says, Jesus, he was thinking about something. He was thinking about, I'm about to return to the Father, and everything has been handed over to me. So he's actually thinking thoughts about his own significance. I'm about to return to the Father where I came from, and everything has now been placed under my charge. He already had everything before he became a man. It's my opinion he laid all of that aside to become a man and then re-inherited it through his obedience. So here he is thinking these thoughts of significance. And the very next phrase was, and he took a towel, put it over his arm, and he turned and he washed the disciples' feet. And you would think, considering his own significance, he would have done some bold, the way we would have done it, the way, would have done it in our world, Wall Street or whatever, athletics, it would have been some great feat. And it was, but it was only a great feat from heaven's perspective. And that is that he stooped with a towel, a basin of water, and he washed the disciples' feet. So my understanding of my own significance is actually measurable in my willingness to serve big time. And so anyway, those are the four things that I kind of wrestle through to understand so that I can better communicate what's happening here.
I love the point about, because I am significant, I can serve, because people look for their significance in position or what they do, but rather than what Jesus has done and who they are, I just think I'm a child of the King. Nothing can, whatever I'm doing, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Jesus tried on several occasions to get that through to us. The disciples were arguing as to who was the greatest, and he pointed to the child. One time he pointed to the servant of all. And so the point is heaven has a different value system than we do. And that's what the renewed mind is us learning how to think consistently with his value system. But yeah, you're right. It's the willingness to serve and to serve big, and it doesn't diminish our identity. It's not like this humiliating posture. It's instead, from God's perspective, it's the most refreshing, rewarding. And everybody knows this when they've sacrificed to give somebody and they see how that gift turned their life around. There's such great reward, just emotionally, knowing that you played a significant role in somebody's life. So it just has to become a lifestyle.
And it fits in with the responsibility to dream as well, because sometimes we think, is that a selfish thing? And one of the things we find we have we call it School of Supernatural Life, or School of Supernatural here at Eastgate, which after we visited you, we got going with. And we find that it's one of the challenges is with our students is to get them to dare to dream, because there are various things about it that some of them have had their dreams squashed, but also some people think it's arrogant to dream. And that was one thing. But actually, if our dreams have come from God, they will actually not just be to build us up, but actually to establish his kingdom across the earth. And I think that was one of the things that we've had to sort of help people understand is that dreaming is not arrogant. So I don't know what you've got any thoughts around that.
Oh, well, it's huge. And because the church has embraced that way of thinking that dreaming is arrogant, we have unbelievers leading the way oftentimes in technology and all these different sciences, They lead the way with new inventions, and it really should be the believers who are directly related to the Creator. I don't know that we have to do everything, but we should certainly be involved in that creative role because we've been freed to dream. And it's just a great misunderstanding. The selflessness that Jesus lived with was not self-abasement. It wasn't self-criticism. It wasn't self-rejection. It wasn't that at all. It was so completely different, the lifestyle that he modeled for us. And he was working unto something continuously, building the 12 into a group that could carry the responsibility to bring transformation to a planet. And that came out of the dream of his heart. But you can't, the disciples, I don't know that any of the 12 walked around life before they met Jesus thinking they were going to change the world. But after they started hanging out with him, they started arguing as to who was the greatest. Where did that come from? That capacity or that dream, that desire for greatness came from being with Jesus. Now, they had an ungodly perception of greatness, but Jesus never rebuked their desire for greatness. He only retrained them as to how God looks at significance, how God looks at greatness. So that's what it comes down to. Our freedom is from something, but when we're truly free, we're free unto something. We're free to dream again. Our dreams now, I want my dreams to be consistent with his will. There's this great passage, Solomon, when he dedicated the temple, this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. I talk about it in that book I did, Dreaming with God. But there's this, Solomon is dedicating the temple, and he says, since the time God brought Israel out of Egypt, he never chose a city in which to build a temple. The very next phrase, he chose David, and it was in the heart of my father David. So think through the logic of that verse. God didn't choose a city, he chose a man. And look what he found in the heart of a man. Wow. I think I don't want to dream things that God has to, that somehow controls, God. I'm not trying to persuade him of my will. I just want to be free enough in him that my dreams represent his will. And he found that in David. He found it in him. He said, I didn't choose a city, I chose a man, and look what I found in the heart of a man. It's an extraordinary thought. And I think the Lord is looking to find certain things in us. I call these dreams the offspring of a relationship with God. They're not commanded. He does give us commands, but the dreams come more as the offspring of the relationship. They're the fruit of walking with God. I'm starting to think like him. I'm starting to feel like him. My perception is like him. So I'm going to dream in a way that honors him. And I never want him to just give in to my will. I'm not in this for that. But I do want to be responsible and make sure that my dream life, my thought life, my anticipations, my expectations, that they represent his nature well. So I think the dream thing's huge.
Yeah, do you want to talk about your experience with the students?
Oh, it's quite, yes, it's, in year one, it's sort of God is good. And then in year two, we start asking our students to dream, and it really tests their belief on the Father heart of God, actually, that does he really want to, partner with what's in our heart? Yes, it is such a practical outworking of the goodness of understanding the goodness of God. And I love, actually, what I did love is that I love that phrase that you've just used, that our dreams are the offspring of a relationship with him. That if we're in a relationship with him, we can trust our hearts.
Yes, yeah, that's right. We don't. I have behind my house here. We bought a new home a couple of years ago, and the previous owner planted these 3 redwood trees, and one for each of his daughters when they were born. And so that was, 20, 25 years ago. So they're good sized trees now. They drink probably 40 to 50 gallons of water a day. Well, we had a drought here a few years ago. Nobody would look at those trees and call them selfish because they drank 50 gallons of water when we really needed the water elsewhere, because they were designed to drink 50 gallons of water a day. That was their design. And so they're not being selfish when they live according to design. And our responsibility is to discover what we were designed for. And when we step into what we were designed for, it's not necessarily, we can always mess it up, but it's not necessarily selfish to dream. It's my nature in Christ to dream. I have a responsibility to illustrate his nature. Where I first started to learn this is when I became a dad. When I became a dad and I wanted to just do anything, I would save up and, buy my kid that mountain bike that they were wanting so badly. And it was just so much fun. The most fun in the world was to be able to fulfill their dreams. Well, I certainly am not a better father than he is. I've heard, here's another one that kind of trips people up a bit. I've heard people say all through my growing up years, not from my parents, but from other believers, that God is not interested in our wants, he's interested in our needs. So that makes him more like the caregiver of an orphanage. Make sure you have a cot to sleep on, 3 meals a day, and a coat for the winter. You know, it's you take care of basic needs. But that's not what he said. Jesus 4 times in the Gospel of John said, whatever you want will be given to you. And so what I believe God's doing with all of us is he's purging us, he's refining us, he's purifying us so he can actually trust our wants, so that our wants actually represent him well, because he's the Father. You know, I listen now with my grandkids, you know, I just try to pay attention to their dreams, you know, just in conversation. And my birthday party's coming up in another week. And for my birthday, I buy all my kids and my grandkids gifts. And so I pay attention throughout the year, trying to figure out what they value, what they're interested in, what they like, because I just want to contribute to who they're becoming. And I do that because I have only one lifetime to illustrate to them my understanding of what our Heavenly Father is like. He is one who loves to invest in who he made us to be. We all carry design. And so anyway, we've bought gifts for, we have one more person to buy for, but we're buying according to all of their values, their interests, the things that they enjoy. And it's just so much fun to be a dad, a grandpa that can step in and fulfill that part of their life.
Yeah.
So and I certainly don't do that better than he does. You know.
I just think it's beautiful.
Well, I love that phrase about, you know, when you're a parent, it's your one opportunity to show the heart of God. That really brings such a high value to parenting as well.
And also, it just shows how important it is, the Father Heart of God messages. You know, that I don't think you can get there if you regard God as your master rather than your father, and so many Christians have been brought up with that idea that the prime purpose is to serve God, which in one sense it is, but that's, like you said earlier, that service comes out of, actually I'm a son, a daughter of the living God. I have significance, therefore I'm secure. And I think one of the things that was really impacted us at the end of our time with you, the 3 months in Bethel, was that we were just recounting everything. And we were sitting together where we were living at that moment in time, and we got this freedom. We thought, oh, you could sum this all up in freedom. And then I'm sure it's a thought from God, because it hadn't entered my brain before. I think it was a word of wisdom, a word of knowledge, one of those things. And I turned to Kim and I said, you know, we've lived free from suspicion for 3 months. And I thought, why is that thought come into my mind? And a few days after that, you gave us the opportunity to share with the whole of the leadership team that used to meet on a Wednesday morning our experience of Bethel, what we'd experienced, and also not just that, but what God had told us to do, the experiences we've had with God. We could say that Kim had an encounter with an angel called Gold. We were there when Bob Jones was actually telling the story of the extraordinary story of the release of 1,000 young eagles, and the eagles had left the nest. It was just an amazing time, and you actually laid hands on us alongside the students and commissioned us. But you opened up, and we were able to tell this whole story, which I think we were almost hesitant, reluctant, because what will people think of us with such a big story, such a big dream, such a big calling? And the whole team, you and the whole team, just your response was to say, oh, that's amazing, how can we help you? And we didn't meet one little small speck of suspicion, just this belief, and we're going to help you. And when we came back to the UK, I suddenly realised, oh, this is different here, because we'd embraced suspicion as a, I would say people regard suspicion as wisdom rather than false wisdom.
Exactly.
And we had to be careful when we came home of who we told the stories to, for the response that we would get. Now, with our own church, it was amazing. They said, this is God will do it. But actually, I suddenly thought, oh, this issue of suspicion is a huge enemy. towards calling and dreams. I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that that would help folks looking in.
You're right. It masquerades as wisdom. It's suspicion. All of that is actually connected in some way to the words jealousy and envy. And they sometimes run rampant in the church. And here's an interesting concept in James chapter 3. He talks about envy, self-seeking, and then he says this phrase, which should help us. For such wisdom, he calls it wisdom, such wisdom that does not come from above, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. So, but the key phrase for me that I'd never seen before until this last year, such wisdom. So the appeal of jealousy, suspicion, envy, the appeal is that it appears to be reasonable. It appears to be an intellectual gift to see that clearly. And because it masquerades in that way, believers easily receive it, thinking it's actually a virtue. And anytime we call something that's evil a virtue, we give it a good name. We give it not only permission to stay, but we're actually inviting it to set down roots until it affects our soul. It actually begins to affect our personality. And so that's why as leaders, this issue of freedom is huge, because freedom means that my success in God is not threatened by your success in God. In fact, it's quite the opposite. If we can grow together, each of us becoming who we're supposed to be, each of us accomplishing what we've been given to accomplish, and do it in a complementary way, we each kind of set a draft. When you're passed on the freeway by a big truck, your car speeds up. It just creates that draft for us to go better, to go faster. And you're strong in some seasons when I'm weak, and vice versa. And when we learn to cooperate together in this dream, in this freedom, we always excel, we always advance. And but anyway, the appeal of suspicion, the appeal of jealousy, of envy, of just that self-inflated way of living, is that it masquerades as wisdom. And so if we can expose that, then we as leaders, both for ourselves and the people around us, we can help people to live with true Christ-like freedom.
Yeah, because if we don't do that, there's a retreat back into slavery, isn't it? Slavery to fear, jealousy. That verse you're talking about, wisdom, it's in James 3, is something that God's impressed upon me as well. You think I don't really want that sort of wisdom, because it's coming from the wrong source. That's not something to embrace, but actually it is so easily embraced, because temptation is tempting, as they say. It has something that appeals within it, so it's something we've worked hard. And another side of things I think that we obviously experienced, because we'd heard about culture of honor. We'd heard Danny teach about the culture of honor, Danny Silk, who's become a good friend of ours as well. So we had, in one sense, studied it, started to understand it. But when we came to Bethel, we lived in it, and we then understood it. We didn't understand it up here. We got it, and that, I think some people confuse a culture of honor as like honor me, rather. But, so I'd love you to explain that, because that is absolutely fundamental value and root of Bethel in our understanding, and I know that's something that's come out of your sort of life, your family background and stuff. So
yeah, it's the culture of honor is just central. It's the glue that holds us together, and once the glue is removed, we're in a mess. It's not the structure isn't built around here to exalt anybody. It's not built around a personality. It is built around a value system, and it's a value system where everyone gets to thrive. And so the culture of honor is where we basically celebrate who a person is without stumbling over who they're not. It doesn't mean if I'm mentoring somebody, I don't want them to grow in an area of weakness that they may have. Maybe they don't do certain things well that they need to do for their their job, their responsibility. Of course, I'm going to help them where they're weak. But the point is I don't reserve my rejoicing over them for when they become what I want them to become. Jesus celebrated his disciples early. He rebuked and corrected, he directed, he led them, but he was very clear in celebrating. He calls Peter a rock. I mean, that was, it's what he did with Gideon in the Old Testament. The guy who's hiding calls him a great man of valor. And so we have this approach to, the Bible says, to say to yourself, let the weak say, I am strong. Well, apparently that approach is also to be towards people. And I remember when I first started to learn this, goodness, it was back before we had kids, so it's probably 45 years ago. Benny and I were each teaching a junior high Sunday school class. And I was in the room that I had 19 boys in there, junior high age, in a room that was about 12 by 14. So if you can imagine me and 19 boys, and they were so restless and they were so all over the place. And to put them in that size of a room was probably a punishment they didn't deserve, But that was our assignment. So we met in there, and I would get on and say, come on, guys, settle down. Hey, listen, come on. I want you to learn this, and I was constantly just on them, trying to get them to pay attention because I had something to share with them, and I was sacrificing my time for their welfare, and they would eventually settle in measure, And but I was in a meeting out of town, and this is back in the hippie era, and somebody was talking about this community commune type setting that they had, where all these young ladies were getting saved and they were so messed up, and he was always trying to rebuke and correct and get them to change the way they dressed and all the stuff. And he said he thought he'd run an experiment one day, and he began to talk to them about who they were looking into their future. Godly young women who were deeply rooted in values and all this stuff. He began to talk to them like that, and they became what he said. They actually became the very thing he declared over them. And so I thought about that, and I thought, I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that in this 12 by 14 room with 19 boys and me. And so that next Sunday, I got in there, and they're just climbing the walls, And I started by saying, you guys are men of God. And they just stopped, and they looked at me, and I began to talk about what I could see in them. They all settled down because everybody wants to know who they are. Everyone wants to know. They'll put everything aside if they choose. I mean, that's why people will, do stupid things, read the horoscopes and all the other stuff. Everybody's trying to figure out who they are. And so when you and I can simply acknowledge the significance, the greatness, the gifting that a person has, changes their life. Somebody believes in them. And really, that's what honor is. Honor is acknowledging the design of the designer and celebrating that and doing what we can do to give place for that to increase. We hire people. They always have specific jobs to do, but we like to create enough room in their job description where they can experiment and become even something more. And so we have our youth pastor who, of course, is to lead our youth and to raise up young leaders and all of that. He does that, but we want to create room for him to also become a writer or to do whatever else is in his heart. So the point is that for this culture of honor to work, we have to believe in people enough that we give them freedom to experiment. And that's the marked difference between what we do versus what happens elsewhere, is we give people room to experiment, which means we're going to have messes as a result. And if you can't accept the fact that it's not always going to work right, then experimenting is tough. But if you have it written into your code, your way of thinking, your way of living, that sometimes it's going to work, and when it works, it's going to work big. And when it doesn't work, we'll have a mess to clean up, but we're not going to punish the person. We're going to go after it again. And that really is the nature of the culture of honor. Culture of honor is, we've had leaders say, come teach us about the culture of honor because my church isn't honoring me. we don't we don't do that. It's not it actually starts with my relationship with my wife. How do I honor her? How do I honor my children, my grandchildren? How do I honor the closest staff members? If the culture of honor in my life affects that part of our world, then it will become the culture of the entire church. So it starts not with what I'm receiving; it starts by what I'm giving. And that's really the nature of the culture of honor. And it works when we take that approach, and it does not work when we don't. It becomes a requirement. It becomes something that's really, really ugly. One more comment. Many people misunderstand honor, and the counterfeit of honor is flattery.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not flattery.
Tell us about that. That's a really big one.
Sometimes people, all of us would be tempted, I don't want to point to someone else. I would be tempted to just say kind things to somebody to obtain their favor. If you're doing what you're doing to get something, you need to question what you're doing. If you're saying kind words because you want them to, ease up on this situation or that situation, be careful, because you're getting into an area of manipulation. And that's very scary, very dangerous area to go into. So flattery is where we say nice things simply to get something in return. But true honor sees what God sees and is willing to acknowledge it in a place of celebration and reverence.
Do you want to comment on the culture of honor, Kim?
Well, I was just thinking on the whole thing of freedom, is that freedom, if you say to people, you're free, in a way they tend to think, I'm free to do whatever I like. And that whole, which I think is a big part of the culture of honor, that whole thing of freedom and responsibility.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think it was Francis Schaeffer that made this statement first, and it really marked me quite a few years ago. Freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want, it's the ability to do what's right. So freedom is actually an enabling power. Another word we would use for it is grace. Grace enables us. So freedom, true biblical freedom, carries grace. The grace that sets us free, the grace that releases us unto something. It enables us to do what we previously couldn't do. So you're exactly right. Freedom is not, now I don't have to listen to anybody. That would be a real distortion. Freedom is different than that. Freedom now puts me in a position to benefit from counsel, to benefit from friendship, from leaders, and all these things God has placed in my life so that I might become something that represents Him well. And that's really what freedom is. Yeah, that's a good point, though.
Yeah, I think that thing about flattery is very easy, isn't it? To actually just say nice things, to
Yep.
Basically be in people's good books. So one of the key issues of culture of honor is actually the ability to confront as well, and to confront well, to speak the truth in love, not losing your value for somebody else, but actually, and I think that, again, if you can just explain that a little bit to us, because that's something I think is often mistaken.
Yeah, you're right. It's actually one of the statements that we make in our own world here about a culture of honor, is that it only works in the measure we're willing to confront. Small c on that confront. It's not harsh. It's just the compassionate willingness to say, listen, when you do this, it affects me this way. It's when you said you would do this and you didn't, it feels like you betrayed me. It's honest, but it's not accusational. It's not harsh. It's not punished. It doesn't carry punishment. Let's be honest, as leaders, in Luke 9, when the disciples, James and John, wanted to call down fire and kill an entire city in Jesus' name, if that would have been one of my staff members, I probably wouldn't have let him go on the next outreach. But Jesus wasn't that restrictive. He redefined what their loyalty to the team was supposed to look like and why he came. He came to give life, not to punish. And so he kept them involved, kept James and John involved in what he was doing. He didn't punish them, but he was very stern and very firm to say, this is unacceptable. but then he didn't send them, make them stand in a corner for 2 weeks. They were still engaged in what he was doing. So that part is challenging for us, because most of us were raised in a punishment culture that punishment really is basically for the sake of the punisher, to feel like he's doing something important, he's doing something significant. He's for Christian leaders, if I can punish somebody, then I'm proving my conviction for righteousness. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean there's not times where we restrict somebody if they're proving to be unfaithful or dangerous in a certain area of responsibility. We're going to restrict them, but it's going to be for their sake. It's going to be for their sake, and it's not to prove how powerful we are. And if we can manage that part of our world well, I think we can really raise up some spiritual giants in the earth that really, really can make a difference.
Yeah, it's been interesting. With the culture of honor, I found it's quite interesting how some people actually turn it around and they use it as a weapon against you. You're supposed to be nice to me. You're not honoring me when you're trying to confront issues. That's quite an interesting experience. I found that the word starts to get sort of used in a way of getting your own way. To manipulate, actually, and we've had to resist that very strongly here at Eastgate, and I guess you've had to do the same at Bethel.
Oh boy, that's a very fresh one right there. That people will use that, and oftentimes when people are not getting what they want, they will throw that up. Well, so much for a culture of honor, and that's where you just patiently listen, and then you bring them back to their responsibility, but. We can't allow, for their sake and ours, we can't allow people to manipulate us with their expectations. I have a response. Somebody wrote me a note here a few weeks ago saying, they said, I'm very disappointed with something, the tools that you gave us to be able to handle this problem. And so I wrote back and said, if you think what I'm supposed to do with my gift, my responsibilities, and my time, I will always disappoint you. But if you are looking for somebody who always try to do their best to represent Jesus well, then you'll be satisfied. And just to try to set them in a place where they understand none of us have it all together, but I'm not going to depart from my mandate to live with this honoring culture. And sometimes it means that we confront. Sometimes it means that we deal with really tough issues. We've got some stuff going on here right now where we've got some real hard things to deal with, separate from the obvious pandemic and other stuff. Some real challenging things to deal with, but it's being done because of our love and our honor for people. So, people are just not used to that. Yeah. They're accustomed to either being given the liberty to do whatever they want with no checks and balances, or they're accustomed to a punishment culture that just the leader just wants to be in charge and make sure everybody serves his vision, and those are just two extremes, and honor is somewhere in the center.
Yeah, and the concept of freedom actually embraces the idea of boundaries as well, doesn't it? That actually you have good boundaries. I remember when we've been on holiday in places, might have been in a hotel, maybe overseeing swimming pool or the beach or something like that, and we've got a balcony, and I'm sure glad that when our kids were small that balcony had boundaries on it. It had very clear metal guardrails and everything, so that they couldn't fall off. But actually, they could go right to the edge and explore that as far as possible. But again, sometimes I find that people think, "Oh, you just said no to me. That wasn't nice." Well, we have to be able to say no in order to say yes. And again, that's one of the things I think we've benefited from as learning from you guys is the importance of boundaries.
Yep. There's an interesting story circulating years ago about a school ground. They had to remove the fence to do some work, and they noticed all the children would not use the entire playground. They would stay in the center of the playground. But when the fence was up, they would use every corner the full extent. And so when there are clearly defined boundaries, people are more free to explore. Mm. But when there are not clear boundaries, people tend to not dream as much, not become as much, not take the right kinds of risk. And it's an interesting psychological effect that boundaries have on people. It's, as you've described, it's very, very positive, because the kid can go to the edge of the balcony and see what's here and what's there. And that's exactly right. It's a great illustration.
Kim, did you want to talk about Beachheads for Freedom and your encounter with Gold Angel?
Well, I just think it's one of the things, it was while actually in one of the meetings in the school in Reading, I was sitting at the back and there was a visiting speaker, and he said, we're going to open this up. And I was sort of quite nervous, actually. I'd only been in Bethel about a week, I think, at the time. And I thought, it's going to be loud and everything. And I had this, in my spiritual vision, I saw a huge gold angel. And he said his name was Gold. And I just thought, this is not my... Well, actually, I had a phrase come, I have an angel and his name is Gold. And I thought, that is not my theology, it's nothing from me. And so it made me sort of think, this is God. And I thought, well, what happens next, kind of thing. And God just put the words gold and sword in my brain, and various other things. But gold and sword were the British beaches on the Normandy landings, and God gave us
the D-Day beaches.
On the D-Day beaches, and this idea of building beachheads for freedom. He said, going to build beachheads for freedom. And that's, in a way, when we came to Bethel, we experienced that beachhead for freedom. And it's something that we are looking to, we're looking to build multiple beachheads for freedom, and each church environment that we have interaction with, you just think, beachheads for freedom. So, the idea of also one of the things is the whole flow of resources, and I think that's one of the things that we really appreciate from Bethel is they used to have these temporary ports on the D-Day beaches, and at one point everything for all the resources for the army were coming through this one beachhead, and just the flow of resources that freedom brings. I just wondered if you wanted to say something more about that.
Well, it's very powerful when you talk about those who initiate a breakthrough. A beachhead is the person or the team, the church, the movement that creates an initial area of breakthrough. And a lot of people, I heard a phrase this week I'd never heard before in the business world. A billionaire guy made this statement about all of us want to be the first second. In other words, the one who is first gets the breakthrough, but they are the ones that are shot at a lot. They are the ones that receive the persecution and are shamed and manipulated and all that. And so when somebody has a great idea, this billionaire guy said, we all want to be the first second. In other words, after this guy's paid a price to get a breakthrough, we all want to be the next one in line to go through, and obtain the victory. And that's really what it comes down to, is a lot of people don't want to live with a lifestyle of risk because of the amount of criticism you receive. You know how it works. I mean, it's people reject an idea initially. They become accustomed to the possibility of its truth. They eventually, acknowledge that it was true, and eventually everybody's involved and thinks they thought of it, And so there's this whole cycle of what happens in the average believer that just criticizes and opposes anything that's new. And so for me, when I think of beachhead, I think of the group of people that are just, they're the John the Baptist. They are the forerunner. Forerunners tend to lose their heads, but they are willing to put their life on the line to bring about a breakthrough in an area that will benefit everybody else. And, history is filled with those kinds of people. And many of them died lonely. Many of them didn't have very many friends. You look through church history, the people that we applaud so much right now, were not that well loved when they were alive, at least by the masses, especially the masses in leadership. You take a Wigglesworth and some of these guys. My grandparents sat in his ministry, and I remember my grandfather saying, "Not everyone loved Wigglesworth," and he was easy to love now because he's not here to offend us. And we treat him the way Israel treated their prophets. They all celebrated them after they were dead. But loving and caring for the gals who bring breakthrough in my lifetime, those are the scary people. Those are the scary people. And we don't have a culture that values those kinds of people enough. And that's what a culture of honor really does, is it gives permission for people to become the beachhead makers, the D-Day invaders that will help to pave a way for the rest to come along and obtain victory. And it's rare to see those people receive the kind of honor and freedom to become something that they need. But anyway, that's what I think of when I think of the beachhead thing, is just the men and women that just lay their life down to get breakthrough for everybody else's benefit.
Yeah. And the beachhead fought for fiercely, and again, we've known that's been true for you at Bethel, because the enemy, our enemy is not flesh and blood. It's a spiritual battle. To establish a culture of freedom is not what I call neutral ground. You have to take enemy territory, and we've known that here. We've known it in our work in other European nations, and that's what we're doing right now. We have taken a lot of what we learned from you, hopefully been faithful with it, put it into practice, and it's beautiful that when people come to Eastgate, they say, "Hey, we can feel freedom here." And I guess it's like you, we stepped into Bethel and we thought, "What is this?" You can feel something, and then it took me a while to work that out. But because it says, "Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom." Yes. What we feel is, when you say you feel freedom, you're feeling His presence. It's an acknowledgement of Him present, and because we are spiritual beings, that resonates inside us. And we find that people walk into Eastgate and say, "Wow, you can feel the freedom here." But I believe it's their spirit sensing what they were made for. And again, that's what Kim and I experienced when we came to Bethel, and we're so grateful for all we learned from you guys. But we know you had to fight for it. We've had to fight for it here. But we would say it's, as far as we're concerned, it is the truth of the gospel. As I read through the New Testament, you see that the truth of the gospel is always opposed by the legalists, the Judaizers, the circumcision group, and that battle hasn't gone away, has it? Because the enemy is still determined to try and take us back into slavery, and it seems to be that's the age-old conflict that we have to be willing to fight.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's a part of the risk thing, because nothing's impossible. That includes transformation of church culture. Because nothing's impossible, we have to be willing to take risk, and it's just the life we've been called to. If the phrase that I use for our team is that if my life isn't based upon the approval of man, I won't crumble when I have disapproval. It's like if I don't live from their praises, I won't die by their criticisms. And we have to kind of, as leaders, kind of monitor our own heart in this area, because oftentimes, especially when we've tasted of the blessing of favor, we can begin to live for the blessing of favor instead of the blessing of right living, of doing what He's wanting us to do. So, but that's exactly right. There's just risk involved. There's risk involved when we want to, establish new things. I remember years ago we were wanting to experiment in a prophetic area. Many years ago now, and so my approach was, there's a lot of casualties in where we're going. You can imagine a trail with casualties on both sides of the trail, but there's gold at the end of the trail. So the reason we're willing to take the risk is there's a prize at the end. And so I told the team, my approach was basically this: let's just stay accountable to each other. Let's stay humble, but let's experiment and see what God would actually bless. And so that was the approach we took. And that's when we start to experiment and we don't stay accountable, we don't stay humble, that's where we're really open to deception and feel like we're being persecuted when actually we're just being rebuked for being dumb. So sometimes that's the reality that we face. But it's that humility, staying low, and staying accountable. If I'm out of line, please talk to me. If you see an attitude developing in me that's careless or harsh, I invite you, please point it out. And that means together we can afford to experiment in something, because we want to stay low. Yeah.
Well, Bill, it's been a great pleasure having this time with you. Kim, have you got anything you want to add? Or
No, only my thanks to Bill and Bethel and the team for showing us, letting us experience, God's presence, the freedom, but also just all the practicalities of unpacking that and how that works. And we've lived in the benefit of that, and I think many others are living in the benefit of that. So a huge thank you.
Yeah, and we appreciate your friendship towards us personally and towards Eastgate. Actually, this last weekend you would have been with us here at Eastgate if you'd been free to travel, if we'd been free to not put you in quarantine. But we got the wonders of technology. It's been wonderful to connect with you. And we want to say really thank you so much for your friendship. Thank you for your generosity. And we want to pray God bless you as you go on your way, and just trust you so much to carry the goodness of God. And say hi to your family from us, and hi to the Bethel Church. And we'll say hello to Eastgate from you.
Yeah, please do. And thank you so much. I really appreciate just the friendship and the honor that you guys always give. And you guys are doing such an amazing job there in the UK. We all of us here have a very special love for the UK. Some of our dearest friends are with you guys, and so thank you. I appreciate it a lot. It's a real treat to be with you.
Well, it's been
we appreciate it too.
Yeah, thanks.
It's been a great pleasure to have this time with you. And so for those watching, we're hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy the resources of Bethel and also Eastgate. And thanks for watching us.